What is up, art family? It's your boy Taylor Payton of tapeart.com and thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, and today I'm going to be drawing some Halloween creature and monster concepts. Basically, I just feel like sketching these, and this is a drawing channel, so we're going to talk process, we're going to talk about stuff that's useful for beginners, stuff that's useful for intermediate artists, and stuff you can take from the advanced side of things to help your art look more like professional art you get hired to do. So, I got a contract coming up soon. Can't talk too much about it, NDAs and all that, but you know that it involves concept art. So I am just going to get warmed up here back in the spirit of, freelance and all that good stuff. I took quite a bit of a break from it in, no, actually, I did a fair amount of freelance in 2020, but in this year, 2021, I haven't done much at all. And the reason was I was working on many things, like my album, which is probably out by the time this video is out. And you can check that out in the description box if you're so inclined. But also, I just wanted to explore things artistically. And to me, that means getting to a place wherein I can reconnect with what I like to draw, how I like to draw, and what sort of styles and subjects that I want to work on. But basically, whenever I start concepting, I like to start off with just a very rough gestural sketch, mostly establishing proportions and the general idea. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. It's sort of a boring pose, and that's fine because I'm going for more design rather than dynamism. Design is better for showcasing different aspects of the figure or concept, and dynamism is better for showing it in action. So basically, I'm just trying to get a solid sort of standing pose. I'm thinking of like pumpkin that has vegetation growing out from underneath it that sort of forms a humanoid body, and it's sort of a thin frame, so nothing too beefy or bulky. Long arms, a bit gangly, kind of creepy looking. I'm feeling a fair amount of detail. I don't know why. Like sometimes you just have these inner urges when you're drawing or when you think about drawing or want to draw, and you're like, well, I just want to do something with a lot of detail for no real reason, And that's okay because you have to trust your artistic intuition and kind of speak with your muse, as it were, and kind of follow those directives because they often lead to good results. So when you have something like, oh, I really want to draw something that has a lot of detail or something very simple, or maybe I want to draw something that makes people horny, that's whatever your prerogative is. You just kind of got to follow it sometimes. And I'm not advocating drawing hentai directly, obviously, or whatever, but I'm saying you just gotta make what you want to make as an artist, and that'll keep you going when it's less fun to be an artist. So one thing that I'm already running into here, which is a problem, is the hands are overlapping the legs, which if I'm doing concept art is kind of a no-no. You want a strong silhouette, meaning that if you just reduce it to a flat fill or like a shadow from a shadow puppet show, people are going to be able to tell what the design is. And especially if it's in like a game or something, a game or a movie, it should be readable just based on the silhouette. So I kind of gotta not get rid of those, but change them so that we can see all of the design elements and aspects. So maybe I'll make the arms even longer, and that's even creepier because then it can reach for you when you're going out trick-or-treating, right? So yeah, that's extra spooky. And again, concept art is not meant to be the most gorgeously polished stuff. It's meant to get the ideas across and generate a myriad of ideas that can be selected from by the team and by the studio or whatever. So I've been freelancing as a concept artist for about 8 years now, and that's usually the case. Oftentimes the deadlines aren't that short, by the way. It's not like, oh, by lunch we're going to need this. It's, at least in my experience, it's mostly like I give people like a 2 or 3 day window. But then again, I've worked with a lot of indie devs, and the games have not been super successful. So the contract coming up is much more professional in a sense, a higher degree of professionalism. Not that the people that I worked with prior weren't professional, but it was like either one of their first rodeos or their first rodeo making games. And it's not an easy thing to do, to make games. It's terribly, or can be terribly expensive and very long running. You see all these Kickstarters that, even if they get funded, the stuff enters development hell, as it were. So let's just save these real quick. Halloween concepts. Yeah, so we got a nice silhouette established now. If you look at the navigator over here, that boy's spooky. Like, look at those long arms, look at the gangliness. You can see some of the erased action happening. That kind of helps with like the dirt falling off. I didn't even intend to do that, but I'm fond of this. This is a great base. You know, it'd be very easy for, you know, if I were to take this into ZBrush, I could sculpt this pretty easy. Or I can do a lot of things with this basis. And that's one of the things I love about concept art is you have all these different versions and iterations. But basically, to get back to what I was saying, before I dive into detailing this guy here or making another version just for fun, let's talk a little bit more about, you know, game dev. So when it comes to developing a game, you know, you need a whole team of people, you need to have money, you need to be able to find somebody to market the game and get it out there and make it successful. It's not an easy thing to do by any means, and I was often hired as a freelance illustrator or concept artist to get the 2D concepts up and running for the 3D modelers to attach to. And I'm actually going to lower the opacity on this guy and just draw over him with a stronger drawing because I'm mostly working in like a big broad brush right now. But yeah, and that means that I would have to, you know, come up with all these concepts and sometimes turnarounds and things so that the 3D artist or the team could talk about them, and it's just really good pre-production level of stuff. And honestly, most of the time I prefer working as a concept artist. Very seldom do I like to work freelance as an illustrator, simply because I naturally like to come up with a lot of ideas and not polish them to like a massive degree. And that's just how I've found that I work best over the years. I will polish and illustrate my own ideas for quite some time. I could spend 20, 30 hours painting on something that I care about a lot. But if it's something that is more professional and less personal, then oftentimes I find myself caring more about, you know, making a lot of ideas and trying to impact the design of the game rather than trying to make one really pretty marketing illustration or something. So you find your niche as you kind of go along. And with concept art, you get to explore a myriad of areas, which to me is really novel and exciting. It's not always like that. Sometimes you're working on very boring concepts, but you have to kind of make them fun. So that's just being professional. You know, it's not about you at that point. It's about the team and the success of the project and all of that. Not really dig in the mouth. Went sort of into value mode again as opposed to line mode. So let's try that again. And yeah, so again, I just kind of wanted to draw something very detailed, something that had a lot of line work and mark making and all of that, which is not necessary sometimes with concept art. It just depends on the style of the game. Like the game that I'm going to be working on doesn't have such a realistic bent to it. Again, I can't say a ton, it's NDA, but I've worked on games where you need more realism or more spookiness or whatever. And what I'm just doing here is I'm finding different nose shapes and I'm not liking any of them, so maybe I'll just leave it alone for now. A lot of concept art is just iteration and getting things to feel like you want them to with the shapes. And you can do that with line, you can do that with values. And I have a lot of concept art tutorials in the Art Maxian pack on the beginnerdrawingcourse.com, where I have all my courses and tutorials, just talking about various ways you can use line or use value or broader, bigger brush strokes to create various ideas and sell those ideas to the team or to yourself if you're working just for you. So really fun stuff. I'm just making a lot of eyes now because, of course, that goes with the detail thing I talked about before, and it's very creepy just to have it being able to see everywhere. And forgot to actually lower my chair here, so let's do that quick. Modularity. Okay, so it's got to have kind of a thick neck because the pumpkin top, you know, you've ever lifted a pumpkin, you can't have like a thin neck, it'll break. So I'm thinking about the actual, you know, faux anatomy of this thing, and how it would need some reinforcement to keep that heavy pumpkin head full of eyeballs kind of, you know, on top of the head and not bending over or breaking. And it's looking kind of goofy when I add these, so I'm probably going to stop and just let things be in that regard. I was going to have pupils, but if you're not making it scarier, if it's not going more and more towards what you want, then it's usually moving away from it. So I'm going to opt not to mess with that too much. Now I'm thinking of like the texture of the vines or the vegetation that is going to be composing its body and how those vines are interwoven to make stronger, more reinforced kind of limbs. So it's not an easy thing to like kill if you were fighting this as an enemy. You would need a very sharp sword or hatchet or something if you were going to face this thing, because all of these aspects are sort of woven together. Like if you've ever kind of like pulled on the top of the pumpkin and you have that memory of like the really hard stem that attaches it to the pumpkin patch or the vine that it comes from, I'm thinking of that material and how it would grow into like a body, if that makes sense, and how those would need to kind of overlap like rope and be all reinforced. And there's ropes that are so strong that they've been engineered to be able to pull in giant ocean liners. You know, I mean, oftentimes you'll have to move up to chains if you want even more strength. But these are the sort of considerations that happen in concept art. You're thinking about what material, how is it engineered, what is its purpose, how can I design on that purpose. It's like being a 2D, or I mean, you can concept in 3D as well. It's a bit like being an inventor and figuring out how you can have really saleable and utilizable ideas that feel more real. And oftentimes that's something that you have to kind of strike a balance with depending on the game you're working on, because there's stuff that just looks really cool and doesn't have to feel that realistic, but it should always feel believable. It should feel like you will not be disrupting the experience of the player or the viewer. And now we're getting into, sorry just to be jumping around here, I'm totally going stream of conscious with this. It's not like a very formal tutorial or anything like some of the lessons and courses that I have on the site. But yeah, basically this is where I'm thinking about, you know, how the rib cage is gonna look and if I can get away with changing the shape, because it's a little, you know, boxy down here, which is kind of nice, but maybe I can make some scarier, sharper shapes down here that are really gonna give off the impression of, you know, more danger, more triangular shapes that you just know like, oh, you shouldn't grab it here, or you shouldn't fight with it in this area, or you have to watch this space because it's sharp. It's like thinking about, you know, when you have a coffee table with sharp edges, you don't want to run into one, right? And so you just, that's like the most basic mundane level of, oh, this is a sharp object, I need to be careful around it, or it has a danger, a sense of danger. So we're playing off some of that. You see, I'm just going in and making a lot of random marks because that's going to infer a ton of detail and allow me to just get more form, more dimensionality. There was this really cool class I took, just very briefly, I didn't get very far in it, in the New Masters Academy, who wouldn't let me be an affiliate, by the way, so that was sad. But in the New Masters Academy, there was like one class with, I think, an ex-Disney artist, and he talked about there is like form, there is line, and there is notan, Notan, which is the separation of black and white. And you want to have some sort of balance of those three things, and they shouldn't be equal, because that makes for boring design. So I'm going very line art heavy with this guy, but I can also go very form heavy, so give him a lot of dimension. But if I have too much separation of black and white while doing the other two things very heavily, very line oriented and very form oriented, it's going to look weird and we're not going to know how to focus on the concept. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. And I know that all of these things can seem somewhat overwhelming, but this is just what I've learned over my journey of doing professional concept art over the past 8-ish years. And you just kind of pick this stuff up for your own area of specialty and expertise and stuff that you do as you're kind of moving through the phases of your career or whatever. So it's not something that you should feel really upset about if you're a beginner, if you don't know all this stuff or consider all this stuff. It's just a matter of learning ongoing and taking courses that interest you and going and learning more and more to upgrade your craft over time. Let's see how we're running in terms of time. So we're 16 minutes in. We're getting a fair amount of detail done. I'm zooming out, I'm checking. You can see that these are two very interesting concepts, and we're approaching them in different ways. You know, we went very form and value oriented with the first concept, but it's still just a basis. It's like a really rough 3D sketch, even though it's 2D. I just think of it like that. And then we have this one with much more line art. It's a little still cartoony up top. It's not as spooky as I would like. I'd like a little more realism. Just because, again, I'm thinking of a more horror-oriented game for this time of year. And that means I'm going to have to find a way to, you know, make things look less cartoony and fall into less cartoony tropes and get rid of stuff that kind of stylizes a little too much in favor of, you know, getting more of a realistic direction. So I'm zooming out. I'm still considering everything from a very far away angle. Now, oftentimes when I'm detailing, I'll be in close, but you want to zoom out to see the full picture so that you can always have an idea of where you're trying to take it. So, and if I'm stuck on something, I'll just keep proceeding with the concept so that I'm not wasting time or just sitting there thinking, because I know there's other areas that aren't as sticky, aren't as hard to parse. And so I'll just give myself ample time to configure some of those other areas while I think about what I want for the areas that are going to be more key or more focal. So that means, you know, taking sips of tea and moving forward with the rest of this, because it's so easy now that I have a base. I can just go in and trace over it with more detail, essentially. And this is still really rough. It's not like a perfect illustration where every mark has its place. And there's definitely a case for that. But I wouldn't think like that when it comes to concept art, unless it's for a marketing illustration or for something that's going to be blown up very big that has to look very good up close. That's something that I always consider as well, is something looking very good from far away versus something looking very good when you get up close. A lot of the stuff that I love, you can really see the painterliness or the artist's hand when you get up close, but from far away it looks fairly realistic, or at least semi-realistic. So that's just kind of where I take my style generally, or where my style has evolved over time. These haven't been super conscious choices. They've been mostly just a result of my interests and continuing to do the thing and learn fundamentals that help me express the thing better. You know, the kind of stuff that I teach in the beginner drawing course that I keep plugging. But yeah, I think that it's really important to just continue to learn and grow and evolve in your craft. I've stagnated for years too. Like, don't feel bad if you do. It's all part of the game. You know, sometimes you get really burned out and you don't want to work very hard, or you don't find any joy in it. So you start just kind of coasting and doing the bare minimum. And that's life. You know, you can't always be super on point and super perfect when it comes to everything you want to do. And you notice I lost my pressure sensitivity again. Thank you, Photoshop. So what I have to do to fix this, for me anyway, is do a fill, and for some reason it goes away. So go figure. At any rate, I'm going to probably just do this one concept, because this video is actually getting way longer than I thought it was going to be, but I think it's still really helpful, and I still get to draw a detailed thing. So let's see, what else should we talk about? So again, thinking of those sharp shapes, things looking dangerous as we get lower into something that could reach out for you into the extremities, such as the hands. And maybe just spread the hand out a little bit more so I can get more of the scary, sharp shapes into the silhouette. Really nasty roots or vines that are very hard to cut, quite reinforced, and maybe, you know, you can always add a ton of spikes to everything, like small spikes of that vegetation often has. So much of, to me, concept art is being able to remember things you've seen or things you've experienced and bringing them into the fold of your imagination and then exporting that onto your picture plane, your image, your canvas. So I'm thinking of parts where it'd be really sharp. You know, there's areas that are safer to attack. I'm thinking of this also from a game perspective, like if this were an enemy. Um, and it's probably something that you encounter, you know, maybe a couple times throughout the game. And it's like this awful, mysterious scarecrow pumpkin thing that maybe gets harder throughout the encounters you have with it. Has a different move set each time, has some of the same moves, some new moves, and by the end it's kind of OP, and you just have to figure out the strategy for beating it, or hopefully you built your character up to that point where it's not going to kill you in 2 hits. So let's talk technique here. What I'm going in and doing is I'm just creating little strong pockets of value. I talk a lot about this in some of my courses, painting and in the drawing course as well, where you really just have some areas that are not getting any light at all, and you pocket them down into these deeper values, and that lets you really get a lot more form in there when you're working in line predominantly. They're called occlusion shadows, and artists have a lot of different ways of approaching them, but it is a fundamental nonetheless. There's always going to be those areas where you can't quite, I'm trying to think of an example here. There's always going to be those areas that are really dark, like the crooks or cracks on the knuckle. Hopefully you can see that. There's going to be little areas, maybe from the side of the hand, like the center right here, where it's going to be no light. There's going to be just no light entering those regions, and so you have to darken them aptly in order to get that feeling of realism or semi-realism. The more I want to go for realism, the more I'm going to be using reference, because that is, to me, where a lot of realism comes into play. And I'm also like super steeped in my comfort zone too, which is why I can talk and do this at the same time. There's lots of things where if I'm really focusing in, it's terribly difficult to try and convey my process and do it simultaneously. But in this case, especially since I have a figure to trace over, I feel very comfortable doing it. And I've been teaching on YouTube for like 7 or 8 years, so it's a little easier for me now. If I'm drawing stuff that I really can't stylize as much or don't have a ton of experience with, it's not as easy. So to my beginners out there, I mean, everything comes with practice. Everything. It's so cliche, and I know you're probably tired of hearing it because I got tired of hearing it, but the repetition, it starts to myelinate. I don't know if that's actually a word, but it builds myelin around the paths in the brain that consistently are doing the same thing over and over and over, and so it allows more of that signal to fire with less friction and more efficacy, at least as far as I understand it. There's a really good YouTube channel by Andrew Huberman, and he's got a lot of really cool, very, neuroscience type stuff to say on the matter. So you can see that even though I've lowered the opacity on my duplicate here, if I start to bring it up a little bit, we're getting some of those forms, and we're kind of finding a nice middle ground between the lines and the tones. And that's the wonderful thing about layers and the modularity of layers. You're able to just play between blending them in various capacities. So this guy's looking almost done here. Once I get a good face, I'm going to wrap up the concept art tutorial, and this has the amount of detail that I feel good about. It only took about 25 minutes to get here, so that's pretty good for some concept art. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with just this face, and I'm going to copy and paste it and try a bunch of different explorations of that concept, just so that we can get some of the spookiest ones or combine elements of the spookiest ones. So like that eye, I'm probably just going to do a similar thing over here. And then Do we want a nose? As long as it looks like a skull nose, like a skeleton, I think we can get away with it. Sort of an upside down spade or heart shape. It not having a mouth works, or we can give it really tiny teeth, really sharp, maybe thorn-like teeth, and it's always like happy, like it's doing a smile, and maybe it shouldn't be. I think the mouth is the thing that I've struggled with the most on this. Okay, there's just a bunch of sharp teeth. I mean, there's lots of scary stuff you can add. You can give it horns to make it look more demonic, so that's definitely spooky, some sharp little horns coming out of it. And those horns to me are the same material as the root stuff, but maybe even a little bit harder and more reinforced. It almost looks like a goblin as a pumpkin right now, because like that's the shape of those horns. It's almost like goblin ears or something. And that's all right. Like I'm going to keep all this because I'll just, you know, redo the concept a bunch on the side here to wrap this one up. So, all right, so there's one. And since I have a white background, this is pretty inadvisable, is to just copy it merged by using Command or Control, Shift, and C so that I can just have all of those layers at once. But you'll notice that if I turn off the background layer, I have all that action around it, which is gross for presentation purposes. Like if you were to have to put this into print, or if you have to make changes, this white background, this merged layer will make that kind of hard to do. But we're working hard and fast here, so it doesn't really have that much of a sway to it. So I'll get rid of that because we already have it to the side here now. And let's try something else, because now we have the freedom to try another thing. So maybe we'll try an eye in the center, just one singular eye, and then we'll do some different horns. So that's a pretty spooky eye. Just dig him in there, kind of carve it out. Yeah, that looks pretty demented. That's already way spookier to me. And we got to put the pupil in there as a bonus, so that's working. As far as like even scarier horns, you know, you can go a lot of directions with that. Maybe something like this, although that doesn't scare me as much as maybe flipping them vertically. So we'll bring those down, and we're getting there. Maybe something more like this. I'm trying to think of how it would attack, how it would use these shapes. Maybe we just put a bunch of spikes on it. That can work as well. But yeah, you see, it's just a matter of coming up with ideas and playing with them and not being terribly attached to any of them. So that's pretty gross. It doesn't read so well because they're very tiny shapes, but if you get up close, it's a nice detail. And then you could have some longer ones coming out. So maybe it's sort of that cactus hybrid that starts to come into play. We could start with maybe some dark, sort of black vegetable teeth, which I just sort of poked in there. And it's definitely not happy. All right, so there's another concept we just did. And we can send that off to the client, put it to the side. And let's try one more, and then we'll wrap up the video. I'm going to flip the canvas, sort of change the channel on my brain a little bit. Let's see. I kind of want that many eyes idea again. And maybe the eyes are black. They're just like pitch black, because that's not something you want to see coming at you out of the cornfield. It's almost looking like a strawberry or like a cookie, or at this point, because of all the black eyes, it's like chocolate chips or something. I'm gonna have to go in and make all those look much more scary. And by scary, I mean I'm going to go in and add some very white or closer to white eyes. Now it just looks like something that's like an interdimensional horror. You know, there's just way too many eyes on that thing. Maybe it has some insect or bug genetics. And yeah, I'm just gonna fill it with those eyes. Let's zoom out a little bit, see how that's looking. Yeah, that's pretty creepy. Just to have it caked in eyes. Because we don't like the feeling of being looked at. It's very uncomfortable, you know, especially if you're an artist. But you don't want somebody staring at you in the street. And if a bunch of eyes are staring at you, that feels even worse. So you're thinking about, at this point, you're trying to think of feelings, how you can imbue the work with some of those feelings, even if they're negative feelings. It's the same with music. The result is going to be engineered based on ultimately what you feel and how you express that feeling. So that's a really good third head, I think. It's got a different direction to it, but it's still plenty spooky. And I would do just one more, again, just one more variant, just to have, you know, a total of 4 between these 3 designs and the 4th one. So maybe we have, let's try just 2 very dark eyes, like super black and wider spaced. And then we'll have sort of a sad pumpkin mouth. Like it's really frowny. It's not a happy camper. You don't want to run into it. You don't know what it's gonna do. And it's like, yeah, it'd be really cool to have like a sharp nose or like a scarecrow pointing out nose, but that would just look like a cone at this point. So I'm probably gonna leave that detail out. Maybe just inset the eyes a little bit more. Make it pretty deep. It's still a little cartoony, so what you can do is maybe shrink the eyes. Bigger eyes tend to stylize things. You can make it asymmetrical. Like it's not quite right in the head. Asymmetry can also be kind of scary, or it can be used as like a cool design element. It's really up to you. Symmetry versus asymmetry is just another way of parsing your design process. So yeah, that's, I mean, I makes it look sort of dumb. You know, it doesn't look like it's too bright. Like you'd be scared of it, but only because it's very unpredictable. Let's make them a little smaller. And I'm just playing with like the proportions and the spacing or the position. So farther away, eyes closer down for more forehead, eyes higher up for less forehead. And which one makes me feel the worst? Not the worst in terms of like, oh, this was executed poorly in terms of technique, but the worst of like, oh, I really just would not want to deal with this thing. Probably that helps the most, and I think I'm going to have some black tears coming out because that's classic kind of horror trope. Very spooky, and the tears can be falling off of it, you know. It's just crying dark, sappy tears all the time. Maybe they stink. Maybe the tears are acrid. Like your brain can go so many places with this stuff, and it's nice to work on spooky concepts once in a while, especially around Halloween time, since you don't get to go trick-or-treating anymore because you're 31 years old. But who needs candy anyway? Rots your teeth. All right, I am getting sort of goofy now, so that's a good time to wrap up the video. I just want to say thanks for watching, you guys. I hope you appreciate this undiluted concept art, detailed pumpkin dude process, and I look forward to making more videos for you in the future. If you want to level up your art game, feel free to check out thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com for my courses. I have an animation course, I have drawing courses, painting courses, and the Art Maxian course. Everything from beginner to intermediate and some advanced stuff. So with that, I'll say please smash the like button, hit subscribe, and look forward to more videos. I'll see you later. Happy drawing.